When I was 14 years old, I grew out of anime. Having grown up watching Fullmetal Alchemist, Naruto, and the like, I developed the perception that anime was for edgy, socially awkward teens. Going into high school, I felt as if I should cast aside childish things and immerse myself more in my studies. Now, seeing the medium from an outsider's perspective, there was one anime that seemed to perfectly embody this perception. An anime that encouraged people to embarrass themselves with silly dances, played into escapist fantasies, and seemed to completely overwhelm everything else that had come before it. An anime that needs no introduction. The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya chronicles the everyday life of a boy named Kyon and his misadventures in the SOS Brigade led by the titular character, Haruhi Suzumiya. The twist of the series is Haruhi Suzumiya is a god, subconsciously bending reality to her will, unwittingly making the supernatural and paranormal commonplace in her desire to bring excitement into her mundane existence. Or so it would seem. There is a theory that Kyon is in fact the god that is subconsciously bending reality to his will. I recently rewatched the series with this reading in mind, and I came away rather impressed at how well the series actually supported both readings. I ultimately formed the opinion that Kyon, the fourth wall breaking light novel protagonist, is actually the author of his own life of sorts. But what does the series look like if Haruhi is not the blind, idiot god of chaos that so many believe her to be? Throughout the show, there is a particular emphasis on explaining how things have come about, and how Haruhi is responsible or at fault for the scenario that they all find themselves in. However, the show goes out of its way to maintain the possibility of Kyon being responsible. In Part 5 of the Melancholy arc, Koizumi explains that his ability allows him to enter closed spaces that manifest whenever Haruhi becomes overly stressed. Now, you could take this particular space's appearance to be the result of her existential crisis earlier in that episode. Or it could be the result of the compounding stress from Kyon's experiences the day before. It is notable, however, that Celestial actually appears immediately after Koizumi remarks on Kyon's lack of a reaction, and he seems to reflect on the events, almost as if to link them to its appearance. The Melancholy Part 6 is interesting because it immediately utilizes this information to construct a completely new scenario. The events seem to paint that the closed space is a result of Haruhi's jealousy at the attention Kyon is giving Mikuru. But let's try taking a look at the episode as if Kyon is responsible. At the start of the episode, we see Kyon questioning who constructed the scenario that led to him, an ordinary high school student, being dragged into these bizarre events before shirking off any responsibility onto Haruhi. This is just before Taniguchi challenges the notion he's a normal high school student, and Kyon artfully fabricates an explanation for the events of Melancholy Part 4. Kyon and Haruhi then have an exchange over what they should have Mikuru wear next, showing how in sync they truly are, before Kyon attempts to shift all the blame onto Haruhi. A short time later, Haruhi kicks Kyon out of the club room to change. This isn't just a nice moment of characterization for Haruhi, it also shows Kyon doesn't quite understand Haruhi as well as he thinks he does, as he expresses utter confusion at the sudden display of modesty. He goes on to lament how dissatisfyingly ordinary the day was with Haruhi in a foul mood, as we're treated to an interesting shot of Kyon smiling as he recalls nearly being killed by his classmate. He then insists that he just wants everything to stay quiet and ordinary. It's Haruhi that doesn't. That night, Kyon and Haruhi find themselves trapped within a closed space together. Haruhi then echoes Koizumi's sentiment that Kyon doesn't seem very surprised, before Kyon confirms he only appears aloof. Koizumi appears to inform us that this closed space is actually an entirely new dimension, and he cannot enter as he normally would. As we see Kyon agonizing over what he can do at the prospect of Armageddon and potentially being stuck in a gray world. We see Haruhi grinning in excitement while exploring this phenomenon. This is when a celestial appears. Haruhi is ecstatic seeing the creature, and even as they're running away expresses nothing but optimism, that is until Kyon expresses his desire to return to their original world. This prompts Haruhi to challenge Kyon with a question that we'll see him struggle with again later on, just before another celestial appears. And as Kyon wrestles with what Haruhi means to him, we see even more celestials manifest, much to Haruhi's delight, before he finally seems to come up with an answer and they escape. The episode ends with Kyon meeting up with Haruhi and expressing his desire to tell her about aliens, time travelers, and espers. But why would Kyon construct a scenario that he was clearly unhappy with? Well, after the events of the last few days, Kyon clearly wished on some level he could share those experiences with Haruhi, as made evident by the end of the episode. After getting the cold shoulder, he was clearly in distress at the prospect of going back to a life without Haruhi, but found his expressed wants and worries at odds with one another. This conflict caused him to question what Haruhi truly meant to him. Utilizing the hint of Snow White given to him by the adult Asahina and the concept of the closed space that he had learned the day before, he constructed a scenario in which he could share these phenomena with her in such a way that wouldn't expose their actual existence to her and allow him to come to terms with his feelings in the process. In the Boredom arc, which sees the brigade playing baseball, Haruhi appears to create a closed space after being reprimanded by Kyon. However, if we take a look at the Sai arc, we find another interpretation for these events. There, we see Haruhi push Kyon over the edge after she abuses and humiliates Mikudu, referring to her as her toy. However, no closed space appears here because we see Kyon finally speaking his mind rather than repressing himself to appear composed. Looking back at the Boredom arc, we see Haruhi referring to people as objects multiple times. This is compounded by Kyon's embarrassment after striking out, and finally reaches a head when he sees Haruhi bullying Mikudu. The closed space finally disappears once Kyon redeems himself by making a momentum swinging catch that earns him the praise of his friends, hits 2 home runs, and pitches the game-winning final inning. You can go through and do this with every arc in the series. We consistently see characters telling Kyon what could happen before it happens, and then reasoning how Haruhi is responsible when it does, even when it doesn't really line up. But for the sake of brevity, let's skip forward to Disappearance. At the start, we see Taniguchi bragging about how great he feels in the cold, and later how he has a date with a first year at Kyon Academy, so he doesn't have time for a lame party at school with weird friends. This clearly bothers Kyon as he previously felt insulted at Haruhi's insinuation he didn't have plans on Christmas Eve. We see this by his reaction to a poster depicting a couple having a pure student life, as well as his surprisingly negative reaction to Haruhi's proposition that they have their party in the club room. In the new universe, we now see Taniguchi is sick and no longer has a date for Christmas Eve. We then discover Haruhi is now a first year at Kyon Academy, which has gone from being just a private girls' school to an academically elite co-ed academy. It's when Kyon meets up with this universe's Haruhi and Koizumi, he's told something that he needed to hear. After feeling jealous of Taniguchi's exploits, he hears Koizumi express jealousy for his relationship with Haruhi. We know this is important because it comes up again later. In the climax of the film, we see Kyon do a lot of projecting, something that we saw often throughout the series. He regrets that Nagato bottled up her emotions so much that she wanted to change the world, and actually accepts responsibility that both he and Haruhi should have allowed for her to express herself more. This is, of course, just before he challenges himself to be honest with his own feelings. It concludes with him making the conscious decision to stop second-guessing himself as a bystander in his own life and take responsibility in a more active role. I'd be remiss not to mention that almost all of the elements in Disappearance are either recycled from or introduced in the series. Forming an alternate reality, Nagato contacting Kyon in the alternate reality through the computer and hiding notes in Hyperion, the time traveling to Tanabata 3 years ago, Kyon being John Smith, the potential return of Asakura, the association of the alternate reality with dreaming or sleeping, the guilt of relying too much on Nagato and the possibility of her gaining emotions, and even the concept of Kyon being a slider, as it's the only thing that Haruhi listed that isn't filled by an existing brigade member. All of these things could just be dismissed as the author utilizing Chekhov's gun, but they do line up with what we see of Kyon's compulsion for reason, to the point that he can't help but poke holes in anything that he sees as inconsistent. After all,
ごくごく簡単で、それまでの理屈に合わない展開を一気に常識的なものへ転化する結末が。
and Kyon has expressed interest in being a writer. When all is said and done, Disappearance is not the story of Nagato gaining emotions, it's the story of adolescence. The story of Kyon taking those first steps toward emerging from his cocoon, beginning to cast aside the shell, keeping people at a distance, and overcoming his own insecurities, finally taking responsibility for his own life. So, what does any of this mean? Do I think that Kyon is a god and Haruhi is without any powers? Well, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. Without any kind of proper conclusion, it's hard to really say anything for certain. But throughout the series, we see a recurring motif of questioning who creates these scenarios and the characters filling roles. The show also makes it a point to challenge the interpretation of events its characters have presented up until now, showing that not only do Kyon and Haruhi live in different realities from one another, but Koizumi, Mikuru, and Yuki as well. It's as if 3 years ago the world was constructed and a scenario was set into motion. At the center of this scenario was a girl who was tasked to bring color and excitement to this mundane world. Perhaps Haruhi does have the ability to create supernatural events. Perhaps she only has the ability to unwittingly find them. Mysteries tend to crop up where a detective goes in mystery novels because they attract it, or else there would be no story. Haruhi may have wanted to become an ultra detective, but there's only one character solving the mysteries. But what difference does it make if Haruhi is a god, or if Kyon is an author, or whatever your interpretation may be? Well, none. It doesn't really matter if the supernatural events originate because of one or the other. What matters is what it means to you. To me at 14 years old, Haruhi embodied everything that I thought was wrong with the anime community. To my 20-year-old self, Haruhi was an overrated, trite slice of life that's only notable feature was that it was told out of order, featured a main love interest I just found grating and unlikable, and overall was just trying way too hard to pander to otaku. But today, Haruhi to me is the antithesis of nihilism. It's the story of a boy rewriting his life from one of mundanity and monotony into one of excitement and discovery, all thanks to the support of an eccentric young girl. Together, they encourage each other to stop waiting around for opportunities to come to them, and to go out and make those opportunities for themselves. The people in your life may not be the most important or interesting people on Earth, but what does it matter? They're the most important people in your life. If you feel unfulfilled, don't just sit there and wait for life to come to you. We are all the main characters of our own lives, writing our own story as we go along. So why not make it an interesting one? The ultimate point of this video is not to convince you that Kyon is a god. If you like that interpretation and find yourself agreeing with it, well, I think that's great. If you disagree and find more meaning in Haruhi being a god, that's great too. I would never want to take that enjoyment away from you. In an interview back in 2006 with Tanigawa Nagaru, the author of the Haruhi Suzumiya series, he said, "According to how we perceive the reality, we each live in our own world that is entirely different from that of others." When asked what he meant by this, he explained, "When you think about what the world is, you can't define it beyond the realm of what you know and have experienced. So the concept of the world naturally differs from person to person, based on birthplace, environments the person has grown up in, and information he got. I began to think, as I remember, we all live in the one reality. Hence, what the world is the way we perceive the reality." I think sometimes we can too often concern ourselves with being right. we can become stuck in our ways and overly concern ourselves with proving that our perspective is the correct one. In our attempts to assert our perspectives, sometimes we stifle the perspectives of others and can miss out on valuable insights that only they may have been able to see from the reality that they're living. So I hope that whether you disagree with me or not, or even if you dislike the show altogether, that you were able to take something away from this video. Hopefully you found something new to appreciate, and just maybe, I was able to get something across from my reality.